I sat in the front row at my grandfather's funeral, watching strangers cry over a man who had built an empire. My grandfather, Howard Winters, founder of Wintercare Hospital Group, was gone. I had barely known him. When Uncle Richard stood up and shouted, "The hospital chain is mine," I felt nothing but numbness. But then I saw our family lawyer, Mr. Peterson, smile. A strange, knowing smile that didn't belong at a funeral. "There's a condition," he said quietly. That's when everything changed. I know what it's like to feel invisible in your own family, to be the afterthought, the obligation, the burden. I know how it feels to have your entire existence reduced to what you can provide for others, never what you need. I understand that hollow ache when you realize you're just a pawn in someone else's game. For 28 years, I lived on the periphery of my family, working 12-hour shifts as a nurse in one of my grandfather's hospitals. I was the shame they hid, the mistake my mother made, the stain on the prestigious Winters name. My mother died when I was 8, and I was shuffled between distant relatives who viewed me as an inconvenience. The hospital became my real home, my patients my real family. But that condition my grandfather left in his will. It gave me exactly 6 months to prove I was worthy of inheriting everything he had built. 6 months that would expose decades of corruption, medical negligence, and a family secret that would either destroy me or save thousands of lives. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every time you engage, you remind those of us who've lived through similar experiences that we're not alone. Your support creates a community where stories like mine can help others find the strength they need right now. I'll wait while you do that. It truly means everything to know you're here with me on this journey. Now, let me take you back to that day. The funeral home smelled of lilies and expensive cologne. The Winters family always made sure appearances were kept, even in grief. The mahogany casket gleamed under soft lights, surrounded by flower arrangements that cost more than what most of my patients made in a month. I sat alone in a simple black dress I'd bought years ago for a hospital gala I was only invited to because they needed extra staff. I could feel the stares, the whispers. The daughter of Elizabeth Winters, the family rebel who'd gotten pregnant by some nobody and refused to name him. Elizabeth, who'd chosen to keep her child despite her father's ultimatum. Elizabeth, who'd worked as a nurse in her father's hospital until cancer took her when I was only 8. I'd followed in her footsteps, becoming a nurse at Wintercare General, though no one acknowledged our connection. Grandfather had made sure of that. Uncle Richard sat across the aisle, his wife Diane clutching his arm, their twin sons Robert and Michael beside them. The perfect family portrait. Richard had been COO of Wintercare for 15 years, always in grandfather's shadow, always hungry for more control. I'd heard the arguments when I was younger, before I became invisible to them all. Richard wanted aggressive expansion, more profit, less charity care. Grandfather had resisted somewhat. At least that's what the hospital staff whispered. Mr. Peterson, our family lawyer, sat in the corner, his face unreadable as the minister spoke about a Howard Winters I didn't recognize. A philanthropist, a visionary, a loving father and grandfather. I almost laughed at that part, but years of conditioning kept my face neutral. The perfect Winters mask, even though I wasn't really a Winters in their eyes. The minister finished and people began sharing memories. Colleagues spoke of his business acumen. A few charity representatives thanked him for donations. Then Richard stood, his face appropriately somber but his eyes gleaming. "My father built Wintercare from nothing," he said, voice breaking at all the right moments. He entrusted me to help him run it for the past 15 years. We shared a vision for healthcare that puts patients first while ensuring sustainable growth. A lie, but a convincing one. As we say goodbye today, I promise to honor his legacy by continuing to lead Wintercare into the future. That's when it happened. As Richard returned to his seat, looking every bit the grieving son son and heir apparent, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, standing slowly, "there's the matter of Howard's will to discuss." Richard frowned. "We'll handle that privately after the service." Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Winters specifically requested that the terms be announced today, immediately following the service." The room tensed. This wasn't part of the script. The Winters family didn't air its business in public, ever. "Now isn't the time," Richard insisted, his voice hardening. "On the contrary," Mr. Peterson replied, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Now is exactly the time Howard wanted." He broke the seal and began to read. "I, Howard Winters, being of sound mind, hereby declare this my last will and testament." Standard legal language followed, but I noticed Richard's knuckles whitening as he gripped his armrest. Then came the part that shattered everything. The controlling interest in Wintercare Hospital Group, constituting 65% of shares, is to be held in trust for 6 months following my death. During this time, my granddaughter, Emma Winters, will be given the position of interim CEO. The room erupted in gasps. I froze, certain I'd misheard. Emma Winters, my name! The name that was never spoken in family gatherings, the name that didn't appear on the hospital's employee directories, though I'd worked there for years. "This is absurd." Richard stood, face flushing red. "She's a nurse. She knows nothing about running a hospital chain." But Peterson continued as if there had been no interruption. "During these 6 months, Emma will be evaluated on her ability to implement a new patient care initiative, detailed in the accompanying documents. If, at the end of 6 months, the Board of Trustees determines she has successfully met the outlined criteria, she will retain controlling interest permanently. If not, all shares will transfer to Richard Winters." "The hospital chain is mine," Richard shouted, advancing toward Mr. Peterson. "I've earned it. I've spent my life preparing for this." Mr. Peterson remained calm. "There's a condition, Richard." He turned to face me directly. "Emma must be given full access to all hospital records, financial statements, and operational procedures. Any interference with her role during the probationary period will result in immediate and permanent forfeiture of your claim." I felt every eye in the room turn to me. The invisible girl, suddenly the center of attention, the nurse who barely made ends meet, now potentially in control of a hospital empire worth billions. It didn't make sense. Grandfather had never spoken to me, not once since my mother's funeral 20 years ago. Why would he do this? As people began filing out, murmuring in shock and confusion, Mr. Peterson approached me. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this privately," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "And there's something else you should know. The day before he died, he asked to see your performance reviews. Every single one from the day you started at Wintercare. He was proud, Emma. He couldn't say it, but he was." I took the envelope with trembling hands, unable to process his words. Proud. The man who had disowned my mother, who had pretended I didn't exist for 20 years. Richard stormed over, Diane and the twins trailing behind him. "This won't stand," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Take the money and walk away. I'll give you $5 million. Cash, today, more than you'd make in a lifetime as a nurse." Before I could respond, an older woman approached, Dr. Helen Fraser, chief of surgery and the person I respected most at Wintercare. "Emma," she said, nodding formally but with a warmth in her eyes I'd never seen before. "It seems we have a lot to discuss. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow at my office?" Richard glared at her. "Stay out of this, Helen. It's a family matter." "Wintercare is my family too," she replied calmly. "I've dedicated 30 years to it. And if Howard chose Emma, he had his reasons." She turned back to me. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m.? I nodded, still unable to find my voice. As the funeral home emptied, I sat alone, the envelope heavy in my hands. Outside, I could hear Richard shouting at someone on the phone, demanding they fix this immediately. The room spun around me as reality set in. 6 months to prove myself worthy of something I'd never asked for. 6 months to learn how to run a business I only knew from the ground level. 6 months before Richard would find a way to destroy me. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Just 3 lines. Your mother was right about everything. The truth is in the patient files. Find Janice Porter's records from 1992. That night, I couldn't sleep. My tiny apartment, normally my sanctuary after long hospital shifts, felt like a cage. I paced, reading and rereading my grandfather's note. Janice Porter. The name meant nothing to me. 1992, the year I was born. At dawn, I gave up on sleep and drove to Winter Care General. The hospital was different in the early morning light. For the first time, I looked at it not as an employee but as an owner. The aging exterior needed renovation. The parking lot was too small. The emergency entrance was poorly designed, causing ambulance delays. How had I never noticed these things before? I changed into my scrubs out of habit, though I wasn't scheduled to work. In the locker room, my colleague Sarah found me. "Emma, I just heard," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "The whole hospital is buzzing about it. Richard's already been here, threatening to fire anyone who cooperates with you. Can he do that? Legally? No. But you know how it works around here. People are scared." I nodded. Winter Care had always had a culture of fear under Richard's influence. Nurses and doctors who spoke up about problems disappeared from the schedule. Whistleblowers found themselves assigned to the worst shifts or denied promotions. I'd kept my head down, focused on my patients, ignoring the politics. That luxury was now gone. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "First, I need to find an old patient file from 1992. Sarah frowned. "Those would be in deep storage, basement level, east wing. But you'll need special access. According to Mr. Peterson, I now had access to everything. I found my new ID badge waiting at security. The word CEO under my name, looking alien and wrong. The guard's eyes widened as he handed it to me, but he said nothing. The basement storage was a maze of filing cabinets and boxes. A layer of dust covered everything, telling me this place was rarely visited. Modern records were all digital, but anything before 2000 was still on paper, forgotten in this underground tomb. It took hours of searching before I found the right section. 1992, Porter, Janice. The file was thinner than I expected, just a few pages. As I pulled it out, something fluttered to the floor. A photograph. I picked it up, and my heart stopped. My mother, younger than I'd ever seen her, holding a newborn. Me. But she wasn't alone in the picture. A man stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at baby Emma with unmistakable love. On the back, written in my mother's handwriting, Elizabeth, Daniel, and Emma, our family, Daniel. My father's name was Daniel. My mother had always refused to tell me about him, saying only that he wasn't part of our lives anymore. I'd assumed he'd abandoned us. The love in his eyes in this photo told a different story. I flipped through Janice Porter's file. Admitted for routine gallbladder surgery. Discharged 3 days later. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explained why grandfather had pointed me here. Then I noticed the attending physician's signature. Dr. Daniel Porter. Porter, the same last name as the patient, and the same first name as the man in the photo. My father was a doctor at Winter Care. Why had no one ever told me? A noise at the entrance startled me. Dr. Fraser stood in the doorway, watching me. "I thought I might find you here," she said softly. "You're ahead of schedule. I didn't expect you to start connecting the dots until our meeting." "You knew," I held up the photograph. "About him? About me?" She nodded slowly. "I was there that day. I took that picture." She stepped closer. Her eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't understand. "Daniel was my best resident, brilliant, compassionate. He and Elizabeth fell in love when she was assigned to his service. Howard was furious. The heir to Winter Care, falling for a doctor with radical ideas about healthcare reform. My mother was the heir? This contradicted everything I thought I knew. Elizabeth was Howard's only child, his pride and joy until she defied him by loving Daniel and having you. Dr. Fraser sighed heavily. Howard gave her an ultimatum. Leave Daniel, give you up for adoption and remain the heir, or keep her new family and be disowned. Huh, she chose us, I whispered, tracing my parents' faces in the photograph. Yes, and Howard never forgave her. When she got sick, he refused to help. Said she'd made her choice. Dr. Fraser's voice hardened. Daniel was destroyed by her death. He fought for custody of you, but Howard used his influence to block it, made accusations, threatened Daniel's medical license. Eventually, Daniel had to leave. Last I heard, he was working for Doctors Without Borders in Africa. My father was alive? The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Why Janice Porter's file? There's nothing unusual here. Look closer at the surgical notes. I flipped to them, reading carefully. Routine cholecystectomy. Wait, there's a notation about unexpected cardiac complications, but it says she recovered fully. She didn't, Dr. Fraser said grimly. Janice Porter died on the table, Daniel's mother, but the file says the file was falsified on Howard's orders. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather covered up a patient's death? Why? Because the real cause was a medication error, an error made by the doctor Howard had personally selected to replace your father after forcing him out. An error that would have resulted in a massive lawsuit and scandal if discovered. Instead, Howard had the records altered. Janice Porter officially recovered and was discharged. In reality, she was quietly cremated, her death attributed to a heart attack at home days later. I felt sick. And my father knew? He suspected, but couldn't prove it. When he threatened to investigate, that's when the custody battle turned ugly. Howard made it clear. Drop the matter or lose you forever. Daniel chose to protect you. No, have you ever felt completely betrayed by someone you thought would protect you? That moment when your world shatters and you realize you've been living a lie? I know that sharing these experiences can feel impossible. The shame, the doubt, the fear that no one will understand or believe you. I felt that way too, frozen in my silence for so long. If you're comfortable, type "I survived too" in the comments. You don't have to share details, just those 3 words can show others watching that they aren't alone in their struggle. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to see today to find their courage. Every comment creates a lifeline for someone still trapped in their own nightmare, still wondering if escape is possible. Your voice matters more than you know. As I stood there in the basement archive, facing the truth of my family's history, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about one covered-up death. If my grandfather had falsified records once, he might have done it many times. And if that corruption had started under his leadership, what had it evolved into during Richard's 15 years as COO? There's more, isn't there? I asked Dr. Fraser. More than just Janice Porter. She nodded grimly. That's why Howard chose you. In his final days, as he faced his own mortality, I think he wanted to make amends. He knew you had your mother's integrity and your father's medical knowledge. He believed you'd find the truth and have the courage to fix what he'd broken, even if it meant dismantling parts of the empire he built. But why not just tell me everything himself? Why this elaborate test? The board, Dr. Fraser explained. Howard couldn't simply hand you control. The board members have been in Richard's pocket for years. They would have blocked any direct transfer of power. But this way, with the 6-month trial period, they can't interfere without violating the terms of the will and automatically forfeiting Richard's claim. So I have 6 months to uncover decades of corruption, fix a broken system, and prove I'm worthy of running a hospital chain I never asked to lead, all while Richard does everything in his power to make me fail. Dr. Fraser smiled for the first time. Precisely. And you'll need allies. She handed me a business card. My private number. Call anytime, day or night. Why are you helping me? Because I promised your father I would watch over you, and because Wintercare was once a good place, it could be again under the right leadership. As we left the basement, Dr. Fraser stopped suddenly. Emma, there's something else you should know. The patient care initiative Howard mentioned in the will, it's your father's original proposal from 28 years ago, the one that got him forced out. Howard kept it all this time. That night, I sat on my small balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. My life had been upended in less than 24 hours. I'd gone from anonymous nurse to potential CEO, from fatherless to having a father somewhere in Africa, from believing my grandfather hated me to realizing he'd given me the chance to redeem his greatest mistakes. I called in sick for my nursing shift the next day, something I'd never done before. Instead, I went to Mr. Peterson's office to review the full terms of my grandfather's will. The details were both simpler and more complicated than I'd expected. To keep control of winter care, I needed to implement 3 specific changes within 6 months. First, establish a comprehensive patient safety reporting system where staff could anonymously report errors without fear of retaliation. Second, create a financial assistance program that would ensure no patient was ever turned away due to inability to pay. Third, and most challenging, conduct a full audit of all mortality cases over the past 20 years where there was any indication of medical error, with public disclosure of the findings. This third requirement will make you enemies, Mr. Peterson warned. Powerful enemies. Not just Richard, but board members, department heads, possibly even government officials who looked the other way. Did my grandfather know what he was asking? Howard was many things, but he wasn't naive. He knew exactly what he was setting in motion. Mr. Peterson removed his glasses, suddenly looking older. Emma, there's a safe deposit box, your mother's. Howard kept paying the fees all these years, though he never looked inside it. The key is yours now. The bank was across town, an old building with marble columns and hushed voices. The manager escorted me personally to the vault once I showed my identification and the key. The box contained just 3 items: a journal, a USB drive, and a letter addressed to me in handwriting I recognized from childhood bedtime stories. Back in my apartment, I opened the letter first. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're old enough to understand the choices I made. I've asked Helen to watch over you and to give you this when the time is right. I hope that time never comes, that your grandfather reconsiders, that your father returns, that our family heals. But I've never been one for fairy tales. The truth is in my journal, all of it. About your father, about winter care, about why we couldn't stay. The USB drive contains copies of records your father managed to save before we were forced to leave. Patient files that were later altered or destroyed. I don't know what your life has been like without me. I don't know what they've told you about me, about your father. But know this, we loved you more than anything. Your father didn't abandon us. He was given an impossible choice, just as I was. Whatever you decide to do with this information, remember that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes it means exposing old wounds to clean them properly. Sometimes it means finding the strength to forgive. Always it means choosing truth over comfort. You have my stubbornness and your father's compassion. Trust both. All my love, always. Mom, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not for the grandfather I barely knew, but for the mother I'd lost too young, and the father I'd never known. For 20 years of believing I wasn't wanted. For the family that should have been. The journal revealed a winter care very different from the one I knew. My mother had documented everything. Patient deaths attributed to natural causes that were actually due to staffing shortages or equipment failures, experimental procedures performed without proper consent, financial arrangements with pharmaceutical companies that prioritized profit over patient outcomes. The USB drive contained spreadsheets, emails, scanned documents, evidence my father had risked everything to collect, evidence that could destroy Wintercare's reputation forever. The next morning, I went to the hospital not as a nurse but as the interim CEO. I'd spent the night planning my first move, knowing Richard would be expecting hesitation, confusion, an easy target. I needed to surprise him. The executive floor was a world apart from the clinical areas where I'd spent my career. Plush carpets, expensive artwork, a receptionist who nearly fell out of her chair when I introduced myself. Ms. Winters, we weren't expecting you. Mr. Winters hasn't mentioned. It's Dr. Winters, I corrected. making a split-second decision. If I was going to do this, I needed every advantage. My nursing credentials included a doctorate in nursing practice, a fact I'd never flaunted before. And I'll be using my grandfather's office, effective immediately. The receptionist, Nancy, according to her nameplate, looked panicked. But Mr. Winters is currently in my grandfather's office. Perfect. We need to talk anyway. I walked past her, ignoring her protests, and pushed open the double doors to what was now legally my office. Richard was indeed there, seated behind the massive desk on a conference call. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption, then shocked when he recognized me. "I'll call back," he said abruptly, hanging up. "What do you think you're doing?" "My job," I replied, setting my bag on the desk. "Your things can be moved to the COO's office by noon." So Richard laughed, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "You're serious? You actually think you can run Winter Care?" I think grandfather believed I could, and the will gives me 6 months to prove it. "A will I'm contesting." Richard leaned back, confident. "The board agrees with me." This was Howard's dementia talking. He was not of sound mind. Mr. Peterson anticipated that argument. Grandfather had a complete neurological workup 2 days before signing the will. Perfect cognitive function, documented by 3 separate specialists. This was information Dr. Fraser had given me that morning. "You're welcome to contest, but while the legal proceedings drag on, I remain interim CEO. Unless you want to violate the non-interference clause and forfeit automatically." Richard's face darkened. "You have no idea what you're stepping into. This isn't a game." "No, it's not. It's people's lives." I met his gaze steadily. "Starting today, I'm implementing a hospital-wide patient safety reporting system, anonymous, with reports coming directly to me. The board will never approve the budget for that. The will specifically authorizes it without board approval. Check with your lawyers." Richard stood slowly, menace in every line of his body. "You think you've won something? This is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken the money and disappeared. Maybe, but I'm my mother's daughter. And apparently, I'm my father's daughter too." He flinched at that. "Who told you about him? Does it matter? I know who he is. I know what happened to Janice Porter. I know about the falsified records. And I'm going to find every other cover-up in this hospital's history." "You'll destroy everything Howard built." "No," I said quietly. "I'll save what's worth saving and fix what's broken, starting with a full audit of all mortality cases with suspected medical errors for the past 20 years. Richard went pale. "You can't. The will specifically mandates it. There are confidentiality agreements, legal settlements, all of which become void in cases of fraud or criminal negligence," I finished for him. Mr. Peterson explained that too. For a moment I thought Richard might physically attack me. Then something shifted in his expression. A new calculation. "Fine. Play CEO for now. But remember, you need the board's approval after 6 months, and they answer to me. We'll see about that." As Richard stormed out, Nancy peeked in nervously. "Dr. Winters, there's a board meeting at 11. Mr. Winters was going to chair it. Please inform the board that I'll be chairing the meeting as interim CEO. And Nancy, I'll need complete access to all executive files, emails, and meeting minutes for the past 20 years. Yes, Dr. Winters." She hesitated. "And welcome. Your mother would be proud." I blinked in surprise. "You knew my mother? I started as her assistant before everything happened. She was the kindest person in this building." Nancy straightened her shoulders. "Whatever you need, just ask. Some of us have been waiting a long time for a Winters who cares about more than the bottom line." The board meeting was exactly the ambush I'd expected. 8 men and 2 women, all in expensive suits, all looking at me with barely disguised contempt as I entered the boardroom. "Gentlemen, ladies," I nodded, taking the chair at the head of the table. "I'm Dr. Emma Winters, interim CEO of Winter Care Hospital Group as stipulated in Howard Winters' will." Marcus Jennings, head of the finance committee, spoke first. "Ms. Winters, while we appreciate the unusual circumstances of your appointment, This board has serious reservations about your qualifications. Dr. Winters, I corrected again, and my qualifications include 12 years of direct patient care experience within this hospital system, a doctorate in nursing practice, and specialized training in healthcare quality improvement. But more importantly, I'm here because Howard Winters believed I was qualified. Now, shall we proceed with the agenda? For the next hour, I endured thinly veiled insults disguised as questions. How would I, a mere nurse, understand the financial complexities of a multi-billion-dollar healthcare system? Wasn't I concerned about my lack of executive experience? Wouldn't it be better to let Richard continue handling day-to-day operations while I adjusted? I answered each question calmly, professionally, drawing on everything I'd learned from watching the hospital's best physicians handle difficult situations. Then I dropped my bombshell. As my first official action as CEO, I'm implementing 3 initiatives effective immediately. I outlined the patient safety reporting system, the financial assistance program, and the mortality audit. With each point, the board members' expressions grew more alarmed. "This is outrageous," Jennings sputtered. "The financial implications alone are fully covered by provisions in the will," I interrupted. "My grandfather set aside $50 million specifically for these initiatives. The funds are held in trust and can only be used for these purposes." "And if we refuse to cooperate?" asked Victoria Lane, the only board member who had yet to speak. "The will is quite clear. Any board member who obstructs these initiatives will be removed." "Howard can't remove board members from beyond the grave," Jennings scoffed. "No, but the trust that holds controlling interest in Wintercare can, and I control that trust for the next 6 months." The room fell silent as the full implication sank in. I had more power than they'd realized, more than Richard had told them. "These changes will damage Wintercare's reputation," Lane said finally. "The mortality audit especially. Do you really want the public to know about every mistake this hospital has ever made?" "What I want," I replied carefully, "is a hospital system that values transparency over image, patient safety over profit margins, and accountability over convenience. If that damages our reputation in the short term, so be it. We'll rebuild on a foundation of trust rather than secrets." As the board members filed out, shaken but temporarily subdued, Lane lingered behind. "That was impressively handled," she said once we were alone. "But you've made some powerful enemies today." "I expected that." "Did you expect this?" She slid a folder across the table. "Proposed budget cuts to offset the cost of your initiatives." Richard had these prepared before the meeting. He assumed the board would reject your funding request, forcing you to either abandon your plans or make these cuts. I opened the folder. The proposed cuts targeted nurse staffing, patient education programs, and community outreach services, the very heart of what made hospital care effective for the most vulnerable patients. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm not like the others," Lane said quietly. "I was appointed to this board 5 years ago to represent community interest, the token public member they could ignore. But I've been collecting evidence of Wintercare's questionable practices for years, evidence I'd be happy to share with the right CEO." Another ally. Maybe this impossible task wasn't quite so impossible after all. The next weeks passed in a blur. I moved into my grandfather's office but kept my apartment, refusing the executive housing allowance that came with the position. I worked 18-hour days, dividing my time between implementing my initiatives and learning everything I could about hospital administration. The patient safety reporting system launched 2 weeks after I took control. Anonymous reports began flooding in immediately. Medication errors that had been covered up, surgical complications that had been misattributed, infections that had spread due to cost-cutting measures in the sterilization department. Each report was a tiny piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that revealed a hospital system where fear had replaced compassion, where metrics mattered more than medicine, where profit had become the only measure of success. Richard fought me at every turn. When direct opposition failed, he resorted to subtlety. Key personnel suddenly transferred or resigned. Documents I requested went missing. Systems mysteriously crashed, deleting weeks of data collection. But I had allies too. Dr. Fraser rallied the medical staff, many of whom had been silently suffering under the toxic culture Richard had created. Nancy proved invaluable, her decades of experience navigating WinterCare's politics, helping me avoid pitfalls I would never have seen coming. And then there were the nurses, my people. When word spread that one of their own was now CEO, they became my eyes and ears throughout the hospital. They reported intimidation attempts. They backed up data before systems could crash. They protected vulnerable patients from cost-cutting measures designed to make my initiatives fail. 3 months into my 6-month trial, I finally had enough evidence to begin the real work of transformation. The mortality audit had uncovered 47 cases of clear medical negligence that had been covered up. Patients who had died due to preventable errors, whose families had been told different stories, who had been denied both truth and justice. I called a press conference, ignoring Richard's threats and the board's panic. It was time for WinterCare to face its past. For too long, I told the assembled reporters, this hospital system has prioritized its reputation over its responsibility. Today, that changes. We are reaching out to the families of 47 patients who died under our care due to medical errors that were subsequently concealed. We will offer them full disclosure, formal apologies, and fair compensation. More importantly, we will share what we've learned from these tragic cases to ensure such errors are never repeated or hidden again. The headlines the next day were brutal. WinterCare's stock plummeted. Richard called an emergency board meeting to have me removed, but Victoria Lane produced the evidence she'd been gathering. Board members who had personally profited from the cover-ups, kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, fraudulent billing practices that had lined their pockets while patients suffered. Richard was suspended pending investigation. 4 board members resigned rather than face potential criminal charges. The remaining members, shocked and subdued, voted unanimously to support my continued leadership through the 6-month period. But the real test came from the families. One by one, I met with them personally. I shared their grief, answered their questions, accepted their anger. Some threatened lawsuits. Others thanked me for finally giving them closure. All deserved more than I could ever give them. One mother, whose teenage son had died from a medication error 5 years earlier, asked me why I was doing this. Why expose the ugly truth when it would have been easier to continue the cover-ups? Because of my own mother, I told her. She died believing that healthcare could be better, that patients deserved more than they were getting. She died hoping that someday someone would have the courage to put patients first. It took me 20 years to understand that someone needed to be me. 5 months into my tenure, I received a letter with an African postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and the words, "I'm proud of you. Call if you want to. Dad." My hands shook as I dialed. When he answered, his voice was exactly as I'd imagined it would be. Warm, kind, with a slight tremor that spoke of age and hard-earned wisdom. "Emma," he said, my name a prayer on his lips. "My girl, my brave, brilliant girl." We talked for hours about the years we'd lost, about his work in refugee camps and rural clinics, about WinterCare and what I was trying to accomplish. He listened, asked questions, offered insights I hadn't considered. "Will you come home?" I asked finally. There's so much more to say, and I'd like to say it in person. Home, he repeated, the word weighted with meaning. Yes, it's time I came home. Issei, the day before the board was to vote on my permanent appointment as CEO, I stood in Wintercare General's main lobby waiting. The hospital felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the challenges we still faced. Nurses smiled more readily. Doctors collaborated more openly. Patients received more attentive care. We weren't perfect. We never would be. But we were honest about our imperfections now. We learned from our mistakes instead of hiding them. We put patients first, not just in mission statements, but in daily practice. And then he was there, older than in the photograph, his hair gray, his face weathered by sun and hardship. But his eyes were the same, my eyes. Dad, I said, the word unfamiliar but right. He opened his arms and I stepped into them. 28 years melted away in an instant. I'm sorry, he whispered against my hair. I should have fought harder, found another way. You're here now, I replied. That's what matters. We had coffee in the cafeteria, drawing curious glances from staff who wondered about the stranger sitting with their CEO. I told him about the board vote scheduled for tomorrow, about Richard's last-ditch efforts to undermine me, about my fears that 6 months hadn't been enough time to prove myself. You've already proven yourself, my father said. Not by saving Wintercare, though you've done that brilliantly, but by being willing to risk everything for the truth. That's what your mother would have wanted. That's what Howard finally understood. Too late. Do you think I've done enough to honor her memory? My father smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Emma, you've done what neither Howard nor I had the courage to do. You've faced the past honestly. You've put healing above pride. Your mother would be beyond proud. The board vote the next day was unanimous in my favor. Not because they all believed in me. Some still resented my methods, my background, my very existence, but because the evidence of positive change was undeniable. Patient satisfaction scores were up. Staff turnover was down. Our transparency initiatives had generated national attention, with other hospital systems looking to adopt our model. Richard wasn't present for the vote. He had resigned that morning, accepting a generous severance package in exchange for his silence about the past. I didn't blame him for what he'd done. He had been shaped by the same toxic culture my grandfather had created, where appearance mattered more than reality and money mattered more than people. As I accepted the board's decision, I thought about how far I'd come, from the invisible nurse to the CEO, from the family shame to the family savior, from believing I was unwanted to discovering I had been loved all along. My father joined Wintercare's board as a patient advocate. Together, we established the Elizabeth Winters Foundation for Patient Safety, funded by a significant portion of the profits that previously would have gone to shareholders. We created scholarships for nurses seeking advanced degrees, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And every year, on the anniversary of my mother's death, we visited her grave together. We brought Lily, her favorite. We told her about our work, our challenges, our successes. We kept her memory alive not just through grief, but through action, through changing the system that had failed her and so many others. I still work shifts as a nurse sometimes, not because I need to, but because I want to remember what healthcare looks like from the ground level. Because the best decisions come from leaders who never forget whom they're truly serving. The journey wasn't easy. It still isn't. Healthcare is complex, imperfect, constantly evolving. But now I face each challenge with the knowledge that I'm not alone. I have my father's wisdom, my mother's courage, the support of those who believe in the vision of healthcare that puts patients first, and I have the truth. Sometimes painful, sometimes healing, always necessary. The truth that my grandfather finally embraced in his final days. The truth that set me free from a lifetime of feeling unwanted. The truth that continues to guide Wintercare toward being the hospital system my mother always believed it could be. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that The most powerful healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from honesty, from facing the darkest parts of our history and choosing to do better, from remembering that behind every medical chart is a human being worthy of dignity, respect, and truth. So if you're facing your own impossible challenge right now, remember, the very thing that seems like your greatest weakness might actually be your greatest strength. My background as a nurse, which Richard saw as disqualifying, was exactly what Wintercare needed. Your unique perspective, your lived experience, your deepest values, these aren't obstacles to your success. They're the foundation of it. The greatest legacies aren't built on wealth or power or perfect reputations. They're built on courage, compassion, and the determination to leave things better than you found them. That's the legacy I hope to build, not just for myself, but for every patient who walks through our doors, for my mother, for my father, for the truth that finally set us all free.